Hey guys, let's get started. My name is Wayne Conger, the CEO of Huts. Today, we're going to be going over one of our How We Do It presentations. And in this case, we're going to talk through owner's representation, a key service of Huts in the home design and development process that starts after our documentation is completed, design is in place, and then we've broken ground on the project. And so today, we're going to go through exactly what's included within this service, how we go about it, and answer some key questions that I'm sure folks have about it. We're going to go over 5 common questions we get about owner's representation today and try and flesh them out and answer as many of them as we can. So the first question is, what is owner's representation at all? Then why do I need this service? What exactly does Huts do as my owner's representative? What level of owner's representation is right for my project? And how is owner's representation funded? How do I pay for this service? So what is owner's representation? Once construction starts, a lot starts happening. There's a lot to track, there's a lot to manage, and to help ensure that a smooth build after what has hopefully been a quite smooth design and documentation process, the Huts team is able to act as your owner's representative during the construction of your home. Now, the format and level of involvement we might have is really dependent on the build team. And so with larger contractors and larger home builders, they're likely going to have some back of house staff. They're going to have estimators, foremen, folks that are managing a lot of clerical work, and that can reduce some of our effort to help manage the project. And we find that balance on where do they stop and where do we fill in so that there isn't double effort there. However, in a lot of rural locations, it's a quite small operation that the person running the general contracting company is both the builder themselves, they're swinging a hammer, they're in the field, and there's a lot less back of house there and a lot less ability to provide ongoing communication on progress, to document the project on a timeline budget, and to kind of manage the customer service of where the project stands along the build sequence. And in those cases, we take a more active role and kind of play the back of house to those build teams. And so why do I need this service at all? You might be asking, hey, you've designed the project, hand it off to the contractor, they're going to go build it, right? And everything's going to go fine. But there are certain questions that pop up throughout inevitably during construction that you as the homeowner may not be prepared to answer. You may not be in the region to be able to answer it, or you may not have really the technical background or kind of understanding on how to understand whether what's being proposed is required or not. So some of those questions that might pop up are, hey, when is any given phase of the project going to be completed? And this matters a lot, both for you to kind of see the house coming to life, but also for bank financing and construction lending that's going to be paid out based on milestones. And so you want to know when these different milestones are hit on the job site to align with when payments get distributed to the builder. Why am I being charged extra for this work? You might see change orders or revisions pop up, and understanding whether those are or are not relevant or are or not should be charged is a big part of our offering. Was the foundation poured correctly? Am I off to a good start on this project? Again, you may see concrete in the ground, but not necessarily know what you're looking at. And we're able to bring our experience to help evaluate both design quality control and that the construction methodologies that we've documented are being adhered to. This doesn't look like the drawings from my 3D walkthrough. What's going on here? I've changed my mind during construction. Am I able to move this window? What's going to be involved with that? How can I do it efficiently? My contractor is asking me a question on how the roof should be detailed. What do I do about that? I have no idea. I want to pull back on my tile costs. We spec one thing, but now I actually want to try to save a little bit of money during construction. How can I revise my selection without adding complexity to the project? The building inspector popped up. He or she is looking for a specific change on site. How do I address that? The cabinetry was installed incorrectly. Do I need to pay for it to be reinstalled? There are things like this that, as much as the entirety of our process is about smoothing out sequences, there are questions that pop up that we want to make sure we can be there to help answer and be there in the right way so that we're not kind of over-scoping our time, but also making sure that we are available for these things that pop up and can continue to be a good Sherpa through the construction process. So why do I need this service at all? Because sometimes things can look like this. This is sort of a kind of mismanaged emotional journey of the construction sequence that often we get through if we're not involved in owner's representation, or the client says, I'm actually going to sort of manage this on my own from here. And then they get a little bit overwhelmed, or they kind of follow a process outside of Huts and kind of pursue a traditional I hired an architect, design plans. Now I have a contractor. They're going to build it and they have no relationship to one another. Things can look a little bit like this, where it's like, hey, I love the design. The financing works. I got a construction contract. It's ready to go. And you just kind of start from the beginning. You're just peaking emotionally. Yes, we're really doing this. We're breaking ground. And then sort of death by a thousand cuts. That unexpected costs pop up and they're not detailed and sort of unknown where they came from. The budget communication is sort of like wishy-washy. The build quality is like a little iffy, and then getting overbilled. And then maybe you sort of drag yourself over the finish line with the builder on your own, and you had to work through some of those questions along the way. And so it's all of these things that we want to avoid during construction, that we want to make sure that there's continuity in the excellence of experience on home design and development that starts right from the get-go with Hutz on design planning and site planning, and is we were able to continue that same level of project management and being a good Sherpa for this complicated process all the way through. And particularly when real construction lending starts flying around, there's real money being distributed. There's a contractor that should be on your agenda. And we want to make sure that they are staying on your agenda. And so why do you need all this service at all? Because when people describe the horror stories of building a new house, these are the things that they're describing, and we want to avoid all of them. Okay, so we can kind of think about our projects in these two pieces. We've got everything before construction and then owner's representation once we start construction. You're probably quite familiar if you've been following along with Hutz on what our pre-construction services are. This includes things like identifying your land, evaluating what you can and can't do on your land through code review, improving your lot through site planning and groundwork coordination, getting your well, getting your septic and your power in place, getting your build site prepared, going through design, starting from one of our standards, modifying it for your lot, your lifestyle, your budget, sourcing the build team, and identifying who we think will be a good partner to reduce as many of these sort of during construction issues as possible, and then producing our permit documentation to get your project entitled and cleared legally to be able to be built, and to get your construction documents in place to describe visually the entirety of what the scope of the project is. And then you sign a construction contract against those construction documents. And that's sort of a stopping point. And then there's the next piece, which is everything during construction. Now there's sort of three people involved, or three groups involved. There's the owner, there's the design team and development team with Hutz, and there's the build team with the general contractor. And our owner's rep scope is an opportunity for us to take on 5 buckets of work. RFIs, requests for information, that'll come from the contractor, go through material reviews once you start to get in real finished samples, and evaluating those with you and how they're going to hold up and what do you think about them? How do they kind of come together? And as a design palette, operating as the liaison between you and the contractor, budget and timeline upkeep. If there is no back of house from the contractor, how do we become that back of house during the timeline of your project? And site visits, making sure that on site, what's happening is what we've really planned for, and that what we've designed for is what's actually being built. I just happen to be on kind of stopping here to take this webinar in between a bunch of site visits that I'm personally doing today. And you'll often see us kind of document our exploits from out in the field where we're doing exactly this. We're making sure that what we've designed for and what we visualized and what we've helped price with our clients is what's actually happening in the field. So what exactly are we going to do as my owner's rep within each of those phases? So you sign the construction contract, and this is the diagram that describes the frequency that we tend to go through each of those kind of 5 buckets. That request for information, you can see in the blue color here, they come in sort of irregularly. That stuff pops up on the construction site. Contractor says, I don't exactly understand this piece of it, or I thought I understood it when I reviewed the documentation earlier. Now that I'm on site, things have shifted. Or, hey, we've been digging for the foundation. If we hit a bunch of rock, we need to revise some of the foundation detailing. Can you guys help us address that? And so these things pop up irregularly as kind of the rubber hits the road on the design hits the land, and there might be kind of small modifications or things that are unclear that we are helping to address. Budget and timeline upkeep is happening throughout the entirety of the project. We have a dedicated owner's representation and construction management dashboard that all of our clients who we work with through owner's representation are able to see in real time any budget shifts, any timeline shifts, and all kind of site visit documentation. And it's basically your hub for all things that's happening on your project. And that's really important, particularly if the build site is not right next door to where you live. How do you make sure that you have insight and kind of real-time updates on what's going on and how it's going? And our budget and timeline upkeep through our dashboard provides that. Site visits tend to happen quite regularly based on key milestones in construction. So a couple of key milestones that we like to be on site for and happen to align with when construction loan distributions are made by the bank. And so it's a good time when the contractor says, hey, I've finished foundations, for us to also be there and say, yes, have you finished foundations? And is it reasonably complete enough that we feel comfortable telling the client to have the bank release the next amount of payment? And so some of those moments that we're on site and checking in on are going to be siting the house, excavation, foundation pouring, framing. It's when kind of the shape of the house comes together, mechanical, electrical, and plumbing rough in, and then somewhat ongoing during the finishing work and interior trim work and finish execution. And so you can see those kind of orange blocks happening throughout the build timeline. Then weekly check-ins, either weekly or bi-weekly, we check in both with kind of have meetings with the general contractor on progress, sometimes general contractor plus the owner, to review how are we tracking against the budget, how are we tracking against the timeline, any RFIs popping up or any questions that we can field or anything that we can get out ahead of. For instance, products or orders that have longer lead times, like windows sometimes take 12 to 16 weeks. We want to make sure that we have them ordered well in advance so that we're not sitting on our thumbs for 2 or 3 months waiting for windows to come in. Cabinets tend to have long lead times. We want to make sure that we're getting those orders in as early as possible. So those check-ins help us to stay in the right rhythm with the construction sequence and streamline and tighten up the overall build timeline. And then changes in material or specification review. So sometimes once construction starts, either a client will decide that they want to make a revision that's not reflected in the construction documents that sometimes requires a change in that documentation for the contractor to be able to execute on it, or a discussion or a sketch on how this new revision is going to come together on site. And we help both evaluate some of those ideas that come up with clients where we say, interesting idea, but that sounds like it's going to throw off all these other things. Maybe not, let's not pursue it. Or interesting idea, here's another way we could do it that will achieve the same effect or the same outcome that doesn't impact structural or budget or timeline. And we're helping to make those evaluations with a customer on an ongoing basis. RFIs, just an example of this. Again, you can see it in those kind of blue bars, but the contractor may see construction documents on site, or one of their subcontractors may not really understand a specific piece of the documentation. And they might be looking for clarifications on what we're specifying within the documentation. They may be facing some coordination issues between trades and, say, carpentry, and how are they kind of working together? Are these pipes supposed to go through the framing? Are they supposed to go around the framing? And we help answer those questions. Any design revisions that pop up are certainly going to be something we'll help evaluate. Any technical clarifications and material substitutions would all kind of be part of this RFIs world. And both the contractor appreciates deeply to have us there to help answer those questions, because often the owner can't. And I think for everyone who is building with us, who engages us with owner's representation, which is really everyone, they really appreciate that we are there to help consult on what makes sense and what doesn't throughout the RFIs process. And like I mentioned, you'll have this dashboard, which is our owner's representation dashboard. It's very robust. It has full transparency on everything that's happening along the way. And we'll receive these RFIs that come in. For instance, hey, the top of the foundation wall needs to be changed because the window specifications, once they came in, were different than the manufacturer thought. Very sort of inside baseball issue, but this is where they'll arrive, and then we will address them fully with the contractor in a way that might be nearly impossible for the homeowner to be able to coordinate a challenge like that. And before sort of approving whatever revision or sort of change that's associated with it, we'll meet with our client, go over what was sort of proposed and make sure it's sort of approved within the dashboard, and all of any such revision like that kind of lives in one spot. Budget and timeline tracking. At the start of construction, we'll have our contractors issue a construction schedule and budget, and they can be a little bit complicated to read. And so we first just tried to simplify how to visualize what's going to happen when, and also add dependencies. There are things that happen in construction where, you can't really start framing walls until you have a foundation in place. And so, while the timeline for one thing in the future may seem sort of fixed, it's sort of dependent on how efficient we are with the thing that comes before it. And we spend a lot of time making sure we're kind of making that construction timeline as up to date as possible. So it's not like, oh, here is what we proposed in the beginning from the contractor. It's where are we today? What is the anticipation right now based on what's happened previously? And so we're there to help you interpret and inform on all the kind of construction progress, and in a way that I think is a lot more easily understood than it would be otherwise. Or making sure that we're anticipating any potential scheduling conflicts or holdups that might come. Things like, hey, the windows are on order, but we got the order in too late. We want to make sure that we're accounting for those and removing those sort of issues early and often. And then also proposing opportunities through construction to save or defer costs, that they're either kind of material pricing shifts, or we kind of get into the space and say, maybe this whole wall doesn't actually need to be tiled, and it'd be really cool if it was this other material. And what do you know that also comes with a $5,000 or $10,000 savings? What do we think? So offering some of those opportunities once we get a much better sense of being in the space and what it feels like. And so here you'll see, again, our kind of full timeline tracking of what phase we're in, what the work is that's being done within that phase, who's responsible for approving or managing that phase, whether it's the contractor, whether it's Hudson, the owner, making a design decision that needs to be approved, what's the status of that task within the construction timeline. And then if there's a site visit associated with it, here's all the documentation. Here's what we saw. Here's the drone footage. Here's the photography. Here's us kind of pointing out specific things in the project. Again, giving you kind of full transparency and full insight in what's going on in the site, and tying those site visits to actual work that's happening. So it's not just like, hey, something's happening. It's here's something happening that we need to either answer, or here's something happening that is related to a question we just answered together. Then construction budget tracking, similarly, everything that gets paid for along the way, we itemize in our own tool so that we can give our clients kind of full transparency from the contractor of what's been paid for, what's the material cost, what was the labor cost, what was the associated profit and overhead, so that they understand all of these conditions. This is an interpretation project for us because we're getting in the pretty rough construction budgets that come in from contractors, and we're turning them into something much more detailed and much more easily understood because it's fully itemized, and we're doing that within our dashboard tool. Then we have site visits, and again, like I said, these are happening at these key moments and at a relatively regular interval, but we will probably be there at excavation, foundations, framing, window install, rough-ins, drywall, starting to get into interior finishing, and during the final punch list as part of our owner's representation scope, walk the project with the contractor and field all questions on the current phase, next phase, make sure that we're getting ahead of sort of understanding what the sequencing is going to be, answering any questions, again, as early as we possibly can, trying to anticipate what the questions will be and answering them before they pop up, and uploading photos and keeping you updated on progress. Particularly important if you don't live directly next to the house and you need boots on the ground, and we represent those boots on the ground. And so you can see that laid out in our dashboard view. Here was the phase that we were in. Here was the key moment that we're in phase 1 excavation. The key moment is excavation foundations. Here's the date when we went. Here's the photos. Here's what happened. Here's our kind of perspective on how well it was done. And so thumbs up, or hey, here's something that we requested from the contractor to improve it. And then our weekly check-in that we coordinate between the owner and the contractor to answer all the questions and anticipate the questions. So getting our progress update, evaluating any open items, going through construction milestones and anything that we need to have in order beforehand, updating the schedule, making sure the timeline is accurate and current, updating the budget, making sure it's accurate and current, and then summarizing these reviews and documenting them for posterity on an ongoing basis. Just make sure that we have a running record, and we'll kind of synopsize these in a report as we go. And then material changes and specification reviews, that during our project on the pre-construction side, during design, we would have made some of these. We would have selected interior finishes and fixtures. We would have selected exterior palette, sent samples for you to review. But it may be that it gets on site and you want to make a shift, and we want to make sure that we're offering alternatives that work, kind of the dimensions of them work, that the product specification is going to work with where you're thinking about swapping it in, and sort of evaluating those with you across the board. And that can be sort of a lot of things. It can be in roofing, exterior finish, it can be flooring, tile, even appliances and equipment. How are these going to work when we actually bring them into your site? And so helping you to evaluate these with you and also with the contractor. And again, answering any questions on, hey, we swapped this out. What does this mean for the build timeline and construction? Do you need any additional detailing to make sure that the install of this thing is fully documented, and we have a way to evaluate, was it done right? And so once again, in our owner's representative dashboard, we will have things like proposed alternatives. We will have where we are in evaluating that change of material spec. We'll have the documentation and the product specifications and where are they approved or not, for us to go forward and including them in the updated spec list. And all of that happens in this one spot. Again, full transparency, real-time updates. The goal for us to avoid that kind of pit of despair in the emotional diagram is to make sure that as you're going through, you're really deeply informed and aware in real time on what's going on. And then we find that that's the number one antidote that we can offer to ending up in a spot where confusion sort of breeds despair. And we want to make sure we never really have that throughout your project. So what level of owner's representation is going to be right for your project? I hinted to this in the beginning that when we send out our scopes of work or our agreements to clients, we often have owner's representation kind of unchecked because we right size our involvement based on the contractor's capabilities. Then we sort of scope our owner's representation role in the right way so that we have offering enough support to make sure that we're providing all the value that we can, but that we're not kind of double working and overlapping too much with the contractor. We're also looking at how far away are you from the build site? Are you ever going to get there? Maybe there's times where some of these check-ins you're able to do, if they're like sort of non-technical by nature. And we kind of look at that. If you're going to fill in on half of them, how can we have you document some of the things that we want to see so that we can help evaluate the progress on your behalf? And right, that last bullet, what's your appetite for involvement? Are you looking to kind of say, hey, let me know when this is done, can't wait to move in? Or are we sort of collaborating on the project as we go? And there's some things you want to be involved in, there's some things you need us for, and we're happy to kind of find that right balance within our owner's representation scope. So with a big contractor, we're probably not going to do all the things. If they have sort of a dedicated project manager on their side, they might have their own dashboard. There's no reason for us to also have another one. And so we'll kind of have fewer weekly check-ins. We might have fewer RFIs, things that they might be a little bit more adept at fielding them themselves. If it's a smaller contractor, we're probably going to be a little bit more involved. And that tends to be like a little bit of a wash on the pricing side. That larger contractor, you're probably going to have larger profit and overhead fees for the general contractor, but smaller owner's representation fees from us. Smaller contractor, you might have lower profit and overhead because they have lower expenses, but you might have a little bit more involvement from us. So it tends to be sort of one and the same price-wise, but finding the right builder for your project is really the objective. So how do you pay for owner's representation? And you may know, if you've been following along with Hutz or kind of thinking about your own project, that your home design and development project will usually have 4 buckets of expenses. And you can break that out in a lot of ways. But the big ones are, you're going to acquire land, an acquisition cost. You have a land improvement cost, well, septic, driveway, clearing, power. You have soft costs. This is what Hutz represents, which is your design fees, your documentation, development support, and paying any required consultant like structural engineers, et cetera. Soft costs are out-of-pocket costs. And then you have construction costs. It's the contractor, all the materials, all their subcontractor laborers, everything from putting a shovel in the ground to the completion of the house, all the way through appliances, mechanicals, everything but furniture. And those are your hard costs. And those hard costs are usually paid for by a construction loan. And so they're financed. And so we really think about our owner's representation fees, because you're in construction, being able to be paid for in one of two ways. The first is as an out-of-pocket retainer, that it's a continuation of the soft costs you've been paying us for design and documentation. Now we're sort of continuing that relationship, but at a fixed rate each month to do the things that we're doing, sort of a regular fixed cost. Alternatively, we can also become a subcontractor to the general contractor, where when they submit to the bank their overall construction budget, Hutz's owner's representation is part of it. And that is helpful if you want to finance some of our involvement and no longer pay for design development services or your soft costs out of pocket, that we can be a line item to the contractor. And in those cases, they get paid a little bit differently. We would get paid out of the distributions that are made at different milestones by the bank. So the bank has what's called a draw schedule, and they send out money based on where the project currently stands. So the contractor needs to take a draw for foundation costs, and that will be a check cut from the bank to the general contractor to execute on the foundation. And part of in this case, of properly executing on the foundation will be Hut's involvement. And so we will be a percentage of that cost at that point. Great. So hopefully I answered a lot of the questions on the big question of, hey, the construction starts, now what? Where are you guys going to be? How are you involved? What are you doing? Well, how we're involved is through what we call owner's representation. And these are the things that we're doing. Here's how often we're doing it. Here's how we kind of right size it for your project. And here's how it gets financed. Like all of our How We Do It webinars, this will be on our YouTube channel, Huts NYC. You'll be able to watch it at any time. Any comments that you have, we'll do our best to field any of those questions in the comments below. And thank you so much for tuning in.